Hi again then guys, and welcome to another return to the franchise, to the world of the Project Gotham series, once again to Project Gotham 3 in particular, and it's great to see that these Project Gotham videos still get a lot of love. They don't get tens of thousands of views, but they do have a very strong fan base within the overarching kind of games that we do on the channel, and it's good to see that. It's not too surprising why. Even those who have never played the games can, at the very least, enjoy the kind of cars that are featured therein. They have some awesome, less obvious choices. Your Caparo T1s, your Toyota GT1 road cars, various others. Now this is another perfect example, but not necessarily on the same level as those. It's not a supercar, really, in any sense. It's not even a super sports car. It's more of a traditional sports car, and actually it's more of a sports car than a lot of modern ones. Stuff like your MX-5s, your Porsche Caymans. Yes, they are sports cars, but not in the original sense of the term. Because way back in the day, a true sports car would be something like, say, a Grand Prix car for the road, in effect like a Lotus 7. Now, speaking of the Lotus 7, there is an Australian company called Elfin, and of course they also make this car, and they were founded way back in the 50s, 1957 to be exact, in Australia. And they were a racing company, and then later on they produced some Lotus 7-esque vehicles, and then they developed some of their own, such as this one, the MS8 Streamliner. There's also the regular MS8, which I believe is sometimes known as the Clubman as well, but I'm not certain on that. But they do have at least two different models, if I recall correctly. I think they actually have more. And one of the things that I love about Elfin is they take an approach to a category of car that I've mentioned before, and I'm not sad to admit it, I'm not a fan of these. I'm not a huge fan of these small, almost open wheel track day kind of sports cars. They just don't do it for me. The Ariel Atoms, the Caterhams, the Westfields, even something like a Radical, for instance, which is kind of like a mini Le Mans car. You would think that I would love something like that, given that I do love Le Mans prototypes, but it just doesn't really work like that for me. I'm not a fan of most of them. On this occasion, though, I actually do like Elfin's models, in particular the more literal open-wheel approach, rather than this one, but this one is included for obvious reasons. It's the more top-end performance version, partially due to its aerodynamics. The Streamliner name kind of makes that obvious. It's similar to a couple of other very high-profile exotics, which have this almost completely enclosed body style, which again is a nice reminiscent throwback to some of the Grand Prix cars and race cars from way back in the 50s and 60s, like the Jaguar D-Type, which in its own right is always a fast car in any game that features it. Now, what Elfin does that makes me like their approach to this easily overcrowded market is that they basically make the lightweight track day equivalent of a muscle car, because typically these kind of cars weigh, say, 5 to 700 kilos, with some exceptions either way, with typically a small high-revving, say, motorbike engine, for instance, sometimes a VTEC engine, occasionally something like a Subaru Boxer engine, but very rarely do they go into big engine territory, large capacity, a lot of cylinders, because they just don't need that. And of course it's not great for weight. The Elfin, on the other hand, well, it's Australian, so they don't care about weight, they just care about making a cool little car. And I love that approach, because this certainly is not the lightest thing in its category. It weighs 953 kilos, which sounds fantastic, and compared to your average sports car or supercar, it is. That's well under a tonne, either metric or imperial, and consequently the horsepower per tonne is over 360, which, from a car that doesn't have a massive amount of power to begin with, is really good. That can easily match much more expensive sports cars, or at least sports cars of a similar kind of level. Now, the disadvantage to that weight is it's still a lot more than something like an Atom or a Caterham. It's a good 300 to 500 kilos more, in fact, compared to some. Now, that's not a bad thing, as far as I'm concerned, because it's justified. It's not one of those cars that's just heavy for no apparent reason. It's got a huge engine. This uses an LS unit. It's a 5.7 litre. It's a V8 in this kind of car, and to me that's just inherently cool. Of course it's rear-wheel drive, but it is very front-heavy. Now, in the real world, it has been criticised for its cornering ability because of the weight, because of the size, because of the combination of this style of vehicle with this style of engine, which isn't as compatible as those kind of testers were hoping it would be. Now, me on the other hand, and for many of you guys as well, you go into this car knowing what you're going to get. You're basically getting a really shrunken muscle car. So if you enter it with that approach, you're definitely not going to be disappointed, because that's what you get. And in a funny kind of way, it's actually an excellent modern day rival to the Van Wall, or at least the redesigned, you could say, revised Van Wall, the GPR V12, which is, as I've said before, my absolute favourite car of that type. Those semi-lightweight, or in the case of that one, not so lightweight, open-wheel sports car. I love the Van Wall. It definitely edges out the Elfin for me. I like it even more, but this one is great in the same way. Big, lazy power. It's got just under 350 horsepower very easily, and it costs 90,000 credits, which is on the lower end of the spectrum in Project Gotham terms. Now, in terms of how it actually drives, although a lot of people hate, at least to some degree, on Elfins in real life, non-Australians usually, because they don't appreciate what the car is trying to achieve, in the game it's not a problem, because this car is fantastic. It's small, it's light in comparison to supercars, for instance, it's very compact, it's fantastic for maneuverability, and of course in Project Gotham you've got a lot of tight 90-degree turns, city circuits, and overtaking isn't always easy in some massive XJ220 or a Diablo or something like that. Sure, they've got the power, but you need a straight to be able to do it. This, on the other hand, has more like the Lotus 11 kind of approach to it, where it's not as quick on the straights, but boy can it fly through the corners and weave between traffic. It's excellent for that, and as it happens, it's not difficult to drive. It's got a lot of power, a lot of torque for what it is, but it's very beginner friendly. The category or class, in effect, of the car in the game isn't ridiculously high anyway, so it's the kind of car that you can achieve relatively early on, but it's not a car that's going to take you all the way through a career mode, for instance. I don't think many people would expect it to, but as long as you go into a car like this knowing what you're going to get, which of course is part of the point of this review, the other part is nostalgia, just to take a look back on these cool cars, well, as long as you know that, you won't be disappointed. There's really nothing to be disappointed by. It's just a really cool, undervalued little alternative in the likes of the Van Wall or the Brook or the Deronda, these other far less obvious choices in this kind of category of car. And to me, I actually love the way that Elfin makes their cars. Big lazy power sounds pretty good to me, especially when it's in a lightweight car in any kind of standard, regardless of if something else might be 200 or 300 kilos lighter. 953 is still lightweight. But that's it overall for this review. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.